2024 Six Nations has come to a close, and it was Ireland that secured back-to-back titles in Dublin on Saturday. This year's championship has been one of the best in recent memory, and joining myself and the columnists today to review it as a whole, as well as, of course, give some refereeing insights, is rugby refereeing great Nigel Owens. The curtains come down on the 2024 Six Nations, and to be fair, I think, and a lot of people think that it's been one of, if not the best in several years. The total points difference between the games on Super Saturday was 9, so you obviously had 3 fairly tight fixtures, although you could say that the scoreline flattered Wales somewhat. We'll get to that. Ultimately, Ireland, no Grand Slam this year, but they are back-to-back champions and secured it on Paddy's Day weekend again. So joining us today to look back on all of that and review the tournament as a whole is 100-test international referee Nigel Owens. How are you feeling, Nigel? Obviously, Mick's being a Welshman as well.
Yeah, it was a disappointing tournament. We sort of knew it was coming, really, with a lot of young players in. To be fair, we were okay. You could say Scotland just didn't turn up second half, but that by the by, so we could well and probably should have beaten Scotland. We were also very, very close to beating England in Twickenham. Ireland probably beat us well second half in Dublin, and the French once they emptied the bench. So it's not all doom and gloom, but I was, the biggest disappointment probably was the way we played against Italy. I really thought we were good enough to beat Italy, although Italy have improved and are a very good side. We've seen that with Benetton and Zebra this year in the URC, but that was probably the most disappointment game was the Italy one, because we were poor. We played really, really poor until the sort of last 20 minutes, and then we scored a couple of tries and another 5 minutes, and who knows, we could have won it. But no, Italy deserved the win. So yeah, it's been a disappointing, but probably the last result probably was the most disappointing. The way we played more so than the result.
The first thing you said there was it's been coming, and I think it was almost fitting in a way, and it wasn't the way George North would have wanted to finish his career, of course, but that sort of last emblem of the golden Welsh era, Taulupe Faletau apart, although we don't know how much longer he'll be playing for. He's now retired, and it really did feel like the curtain has come down on that era now, and obviously to finish with a wooden spoon is kind of, for many, a reflection of the phrase rock bottom keeps being used, and Wales's trajectory over the Six Nations, like you say, their close games were towards the start there, and then they faded against France and faded badly against Italy. So what do you make of the sort of, trajectory of the Six Nations being maybe a metaphor as well for, unfortunately, how the international game is shaping up there in general?
Yeah, as you said, if you go back to sort of probably 2000 and probably say 2003, I think, when we sort of in the World Cup, when Shane Williams came to prevalence, and from that sort of time on, particularly 2005 when he won the Grand Slam, then that sort of 15-20 years, under Ruddock first of all, and then under Gatland after then, there were top class world players in that, and I think probably the best side of Wales was probably around the 2011, 12, maybe 13, and I still have no doubts. A lot of Kiwis may not agree with this, but if Wales would have gone to the final in 2011, we would have beaten New Zealand, because New Zealand were under pressure in that final and probably shouldn't have won it. France were the better team that day, to be honest. So New Zealand were very, very lucky to win that.
Referees, isn't it? Referees, Nigel.
Undoubtedly.
Hey, what can you do with them?
Well, you can talk about referees, but then if you look at, when Wales had, Hookie missed a penalty, Halfpenny missed a penalty at the end, but everybody still goes back to, rightly or wrongly, whether that yellow card counts. But obviously, it was a factor in the game, of course. So there's a lot of big names gone then. Pretty much very sort of mirrors a bit of the 70s, isn't it? During the sort of late 70s, 79 onwards, then Wales became pretty average side for a while, and then started till the rebuild came again decades later. But we haven't got those players in the regions at the moment. Those big top quality world class players are just not there. You've got the odd one or two, but you need 15, 20 of those today, particularly with the likes of Italy have done. Italy they've got a good lot of youngsters. They've got a good academy system there. They've got a good numbers playing. And if I'm I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that the guy who went over to Italy to set all that up was the same guy that set up the Irish Academy with Ireland, who is now part of Joe Smith's coaching setup in Australia. So it'll be very interesting to see what he does in Australia in the next few years. So yeah, that we haven't got that sort of right in Wales, I think. So they can point the finger at a lot of people at the top end of the game, but they've got to really look at the structure here in Wales, the academy structure and everything, which hasn't been right for a long time. But yeah, there was a few years ago, people were calling for Italy to be chucked out of the Six Nations.
I know.
A lot of those Welsh people calling that, they're very quiet after this weekend, that's for sure.
No, Nigel, the Welsh people are very emotional, heart and sleeve, I'd say. But you get all the sort of doomsters this weekend. I mean, people like you will know that this is not rock bottom. I mean, Wales have lost 96-13 away to South Africa. They've lost by 60 points away to Australia, and the team were fighting at the dinner afterwards. So this is not rock bottom, even as bad as it seems at the moment. So one or two of you slightly elder citizens need to remind the younger generation that, teams do regenerate.
Yeah, you're right. A lot of teams have gone through it. If you look at England, pretty average, after the World Cup 2003, then some sort of 2005, probably after the Lions tour to New Zealand, England were pretty average for quite a few years, and then they sort of got back into it a bit. So yeah, you're right. I remember, and I'm not that old. A lot of people older than me. I remember some really, really tougher times in Welsh rugby, and you do need, there are some good quality players there, but they just need the time and the experience now. But obviously at international level, it's very unforgiving, isn't it? People don't give you that time, but you need it. All the sort of great sides will come to a time where they need to rebuild, and that's where we are at the moment. But I think there is, as I said, not so much the result on the weekend. It is just the way we played. We were poor on the weekend for a long period in that game, and that's probably what was more disappointing than actually the result itself, maybe. But yeah, it is a rebuilding process, and hopefully we can start to rebuild. As I said, there was a couple of games in the Six Nations we were very unlucky not to get a result. So but that luck faded away in the last two games, that's for sure.
It was a bad game, wasn't it, scheduling wise for Wales? Because I think if you're a side that's low on confidence, Italy aren't the kind of team that's going to scare you into a performance. If they'd been playing the All Blacks on the weekend, I mean, they would have lost. But it may well have been a more of a feel-good performance that they put in. But a side like Italy, I think, are sort of fraught with danger for a young team that's short of confidence and short of basic international know-how, really.
Chris, I think that's clutching at straws. I mean, I think if they played the All Blacks, they would have got a real thumping. I mean, the thing that intrigues me about what you said, Nigel, is that what we've always thought about Wales is that there has always been a reservoir of players and talented players at that coming through. That's the image I think that others outside Wales have of Wales. And, to hear you talking about a country like Italy, which, where rugby union is very much probably less so, but still in the background. Yeah. What are the playing numbers in Wales? Have they dropped off the edge of a cliff as they have in England? Is there a problem with the transfer of the responsibility going to the regions rather than the national union bringing players through? What's your reading on that? Because it's very important that Wales regenerate at the age group levels, isn't it?
Yeah. There are a lot more children playing football in Wales at the moment. The numbers in the junior sections in Wales are quite high. There's still a lot of kids playing rugby on a Sunday morning, a huge amount. But I think the loss comes from sort of 16 onwards. They don't transition into youth rugby, a lot of them. And then some who do go into youth rugby, then after youth rugby, don't transition into seniors in the community game. I think the academy needs to be looked at, because it's happened here in my local club in Pontyberem. You have a couple of players who will be in the Scarlets Academy, and yet they're not allowed to play for the youth or the under-16s or the youth in Pontevedra, because they prefer them to be in the gym putting weight on, and then they may not be playing for 5 or 6 weeks because they're on a training program. You know, they should be playing at that age with their mates in their local club. So they really need to look at the way that's all structured, I think, because you know they haven't got that. They haven't got that right. That's for sure. You know, in the past, you know, we've always been producing good players, even if the national side wasn't doing well. The under-20s with some talent there and playing well. You know, the under-20s at the moment are struggling a bit as well. They did a great win against Italy, especially in the second half on the weekend, in all fairness to them. So there are some talented players coming through, but you know, the retention, I think, of numbers sort of from the sort of 16 upwards, I think. And I think there's too many players falling through the net. You know, you can't decide who's going to be a future international at 14 years of age. You know, surely some can, but there are other players, you know, who probably are just as talented and more mature. Jack Morgan is a great example. You know, went to play semi-professional rugby in Aberavon and then picked up from there. Now is the Welsh captain, and the way that it's going at the moment may well be one of the very, very few players who are on the Lions tour when it comes around.
That's
really,
the trouble with
so,
academy structures, though, Nigel, isn't it? That
yeah.
important decisions are made very early.
Too early,
yeah. And a lot of kids are going to have what they think is their ambition to play a high level brand of rugby. If that's cut off because you've missed the cut at 14, I don't see where the enticement or encouragement to go into the community game, if the community game is only ever now going to be, that's it. That's the most you can aspire to. Whereas back in the day when I was a kid, if you played for the best side in Bath, you had an even chance of Bath United looking at you. And if you got a game for Bath United and you front it up, then the world was your oyster a little bit. And that doesn't seem to be the system now.
No, you're right. And I think what you're seeing a lot as well, I know a few of them personally as well, who, you know, they're in the academy at 16, 17, and by 18 they said, look, you're not good enough. And then all of a sudden they go off the rails a bit. They struggle mentally as well.
Well, football's full of that as well, isn't it?
And then walk away from the game because they probably feel a sense of resentment or probably feel maybe a sense of failure. You know, well, you know, I was in the academy, you know, they're telling me I'm not good enough, and well, I'm not going to play for my local club anymore. So there's a lot of that, and quite a few of them struggle as well with that. So they really need to look at that, I think, and you know, they sort of need to go to places like Ireland. I think we've got it spot on, and I think Italy now as well. So there's a lesson there, I think, for a lot of people, I think, to sort of how we really need to structure it right from the bottom all the way up, I think, you know. And obviously as well, we're losing players as well. You know, we've got a lovely winger in Exeter who's now playing for England. So we're born and bred in Cardiff. So, you know, there's the lot, and then obviously the players who go then to have their education in England and through the systems that they have there, and then all of a sudden they're qualified to play England and may make that choice as well. I don't understand how, if you're a Welshman or an Englishman or a Scotsman, how you want to play to another country. I don't know. That is something I think World Rugby needs to look at as a whole. I think it's ridiculous that you can move to a country.
We can all drink to that, Nigel. That's a big bone of contention with us on this podcast. You know, I think people know nationality. They know if somebody's Welsh or Scottish, and that has to be the first choice and the only choice, in my opinion. I don't like this swapping around after 3 years. Okay, if you've got heritage, I understand that, but you had that choice anyway. You know, you can't. I think
football have got that right. I think what's one thing sort of rugby can learn from football. Football have got the qualification of how you can play for your country right. I think it's just parents or grandparents, I think. And that, I think, is something, you know, rugby. Now, if you're a young kid and you could be a Welsh kid and your family moved to work in England or in Ireland or somewhere, and you've moved at 5 years of age, and then, you know, you're all your friends. And then that when you become 18, 19, that becomes, you've been there for 10, 12, 14 years. That's a different story. But for me, five years is not. It's a little bit like they did here with the regions in Wales, I think. When the clubs finished and they moved to a regions, they sort of did it halfway house to try and keep everybody happy, and it didn't work. And I think that's the same with the qualification. It was 3 years. then everybody settled, okay, let's go in between, let's go for 5 years to keep everybody happy, and it wasn't the right thing to do. So that's another thing I think they need to look at. It will benefit as well, I think, the whole of rugby, particularly the tier 2 nations. It will help strengthen them as well around the qualification, because Wales have done it, England do it, Ireland, Scotland,
everybody does it. Oh well, all the tier 1 countries do it.
They all do it.
But it's driven so much by what happened in the Pacific, isn't it? I mean, that's the sort of ground zero of the argument. The All Blacks. I mean, people like Sivivatu and Rokethoko and all those kinds of guys. I think certainly one of them. Was it Sivivatu? They pretty much took from. I mean, he had played for Fiji, or certainly played.
Well, they played for the Pacific Islanders. Do you remember they formed that
right,
Pacific Islanders team, and the Kiwis nicked 2 of them for the 2005 Lions.
And then there was always the suspicion that they throw them an A cap or play them in the sevens or wherever the cutoff is, just to deny them to everyone else.
The problem with the 5-year residency is that all that will happen is that they will go, the nations that are looking to cherry pick players will go there earlier in order to make sure that they've got the who qualify, at the age of, they'll look at them at 16 and go for them then rather than later in the script.
I don't think as well that what they've brought in recently to enable you to go back to your country of origin to play after a certain amount of time, I think that's going to have the opposite effect, because I think what some players are thinking, well, I'll go to France, I'll go to New Zealand, or I'll go to Ireland, or I'll go to wherever, and then if I don't make it there, I can always come back here. So I think that's probably going to actually increase the amount of players who may want to fancy the chances.
I mean, Ollie Hassel-Collins, 1 year after being capped by England, was quoted. Now, I'm assuming this quote's correct, last month, of saying that he would think about playing for Wales if he can't get back in the England team. Listen, that's 1 year after being capped. Work harder, be better, get back in the England squad. You can't, having that option is not healthy, that second option. Concentrate on what you have got.
If we'd had a proper system, Paul Ackford would only have been able to play for Germany. Quite right too. Quite right too.
Nigel, I wanted to ask the floor about this, more of an open question, but one of the biggest talking points after the Wales game was when Warren Gatland came in a press conference to say that he'd offered his resignation, which had then been rejected by the CEO. What do we make of that? Obviously, I think John Barclay put it quite well. He and Sam Warburton had a bit of a disagreement on it on the BBC. John was it doesn't exactly send a message of we're all in this together. And it doesn't necessarily send a message of I feel I'm the right man for the job. I can dig us out of this mess, so to speak. Do we agree with that? Or do we think it's a man who's saying, I recognize that change may be needed, and if it is needed, I'm very much in a position to facilitate that?
I think, like a lot of things that we say or what we do, is you have to put it in context. And I think as well, you have to probably know the person or the way that he may say or deal with things. And sometimes it could have been said in tongue in cheek, it's difficult to know really what actually, unless he comes out and says, well, this is what I meant by it. It's difficult to know. That Gats is, he's a pretty dry character, he's quite a little dry humor to him, and he's a good man manager of situations like that. And so you'd have to put in context, I think, of how it came about and how it was said. And I suppose you can look at on both ways. You could look at a man who's being quite honest. Look, I understand, there's going to be a lot of questions asked after this Six Nations. And look, if you want me to resign, then I will. That then means that they're going to back him or not, which they've done. It could be a tongue-in-cheek. So it's really difficult to know in what context it is meant, really. And I suppose you can read into it probably whatever your opinion of like Sam had a different opinion to John Barclay. So a lot of it comes down to that, I think. The difficult problem is, in the moment, is he hasn't got. We all know, no matter who you put into coach Wales at the moment, they may well try and change the way that we play the game, but still we haven't got that strength and depth of players at the moment. There are young players learning. So whatever coach you have at the moment, is this is what you've got to work with, really. And I'd be quietly confident, you know, that you know, when you've been in Wales for that period of time, if somebody's going to be able to sort of work through this and get us back up to the level we should be, then Gats is going to be able to do that. But you know, he's going to have the quality players to do that. And at the moment, the way that he sort of Wales sort of, when Wales were very strong, they won the physical contact area, didn't they? You know, they bullied sides in a sense, and that's something that Wales don't usually do. When they beat South Africa, when they were beating England, you know, they were able to bully and win those collisions. They haven't got the players to do that at the moment, and there needs to be a shift of the type of style, the type of players. Just Gats change the way that he approaches or coaches the game, and that's something that they will have to do as a whole, as a team of coaches and a team of players, I think, and you know, play to the best ability that you've got. But he certainly hasn't got those big hitters to play the style that Wales were successful at in that sort of 15 years.
He's an interesting mix, Warren, isn't he? You're absolutely right. He is dry, and he can be quite quietly playful with some of the things he says. But he's not an Eddie Jones. He doesn't have the skin of a rhino, Warren. And I think it would have been important to him, or maybe this is the way he thought, to send out the signal that he was prepared to take responsibility for this. That it wasn't anyone else's fault. He wasn't going to try and shift the blame. He wasn't going to try and blame a load of circumstances. That at least he wanted it public, that he made the gesture, if you like, or something more than the gesture. He made a straight offer. Look, we are where we are. If you want me to continue, I'm happy to continue. If you want me to walk away, I quite understand it. And I think from his perspective and the type of character I understood him to be through working with him on his book for a year, he's a softer, he's not a soft character, but he's a softer character than many coaches we've come across in terms of his acute awareness of what people think.
And I still found it a little bit odd though, because put it in context, a few months ago he was saying if he'd known what a mess Welsh rugby was in, he wouldn't have taken the job. So when you put it alongside that, it doesn't look so clever. And the other thing is, if I had literally come off the park after a very disappointing defeat, a whitewash, and gone to the CEO and offered my resignation, I think I'd be a bit more emotional about things. And when he just came in and made a little, there was a little bit of a chuckle, wasn't there? And a little bit of a glint in his eye about that. I didn't think it was a very clever way of reacting, and it didn't seem to have any emotion in it. You know, listen, his track record stands for itself. You give him the benefit of the doubt, but I didn't think it was his finest moment, to be honest.
I think he's very shrewd, and I think that he knew that there was probably going to be, because there usually is in Wales after you know, this sort of level of downturn in performance, that people were going to be calling for his head, and that he preempted it. He basically, you know, he said he took the fire away in some ways, you know, by saying, look, it is what it is, and I'm sure that if his bluff had been called, then he would have honored it. You know, if the chief executive had said, yeah, you know, it's something we need to talk about, and maybe, you know, maybe this is time. You know, you can't bluff with things like that. You know,
No,
I mean,
I agree with that.
I'm sure that he feels that he can take Wales forward, and that he's probably the best person to do so. But he also recognises that the level of performance is going to be unacceptable. And I think that in a way he wanted to spike the guns of those who were going to come after him.
Those of us on the Lions tour in 2013 who saw how shaken he was by the reaction to the dropping of O'Driscoll, and he was shaken. Part of it was a sort of naivety about what social media was at the time. I don't think Warren was on top of social media at the time. He's probably not on top of it now, but he was shaken to his shoes. It's one of my jokes that fell flat, because Martin McGuinness, of all people on God's earth, had put out a tweet about the appalling decision to drop O'Driscoll from a Lions test team, and I told Warren that had happened. And Warren, of course, had coached in Ireland, so he knew the whole history of McGuinness and everything associated around him. And I said, and at the bottom it said, "We know where you live." And Warren took me seriously and looked absolutely petrified. I said, "The last bit's a joke, Warren." But he was really taken aback by the stream of invective. So maybe Nick's onto something there, that he saw another stream of invective coming his way, and he's put on a suit of armour.
Yeah, I think there was something calculated about it. That's what I'm saying. You know, there wasn't the emotion in it that you would expect if that had been a knee-jerk thing coming off the field after, you know, another bad defeat. I think we're a little bit soft on him at the moment. 14 of the 15 team that started on Saturday were in the World Cup squad. He had them for 4 months and a World Cup campaign. He's had them for 9 weeks now. It was his decision to drop George North, Nick Tompkins against the French. It was his decision not to pick Rowlands and Grady on Saturday. They were utterly shambolic in the first half, Wales, and how a group of professional sportsmen with the best facilities in the world Wales have the best training facilities in the world, how they could be that shambolic after 6 months together, albeit they're bleeding in young guys. But the core of that team has had a lot of time together. And I was shocked how poor Wales were in the first half. In fact, for the first 65 minutes.
Yeah, they benefited from, you know, the easy side of the draw, just as England did in the World Cup. Look, he in a way, what I think what everybody has to look at is, where are the other players that he's going to call in? They're not there at the moment. So he's got a particular group of players that he's got to, you know, improve. And I think that, you know, after 6 weeks of it, or 7 weeks of it, and seeing that there wasn't the level of improvement going on, I think, you know, he probably would look at it with a sort of.
You'd expect a team under Warren, no matter how poor the general standard, to improve game on game, wouldn't you? And the exact opposite is happening.
On paper, I think the side is when everyone's fit and available, is slightly stronger than perhaps some people think. But I think he has issues in the tight five, and I think he has a decision to make. Given the whole Welsh tradition of rugby, he has a decision to make it 10. I mean, this Hewett Lloyd, who we saw a lot of in Bristol, this is where I live. Excuse me. So I was happily for the audience, I was just about to run out of battery there. I mean, Hewett Lloyd can play for sure. I mean, whether his style of play translates easily to the pressures of international rugby, you only find out by watching him play. But he's got, I mean, I thought Sam Costello was pretty poor at the weekend. I thought Nick Tompkins will probably never play as badly again. I mean, he just made a bag of unforced errors. He had one of those Ollie Lawrence games that we saw earlier in the championship. So there are just things that are going to go wrong on the afternoon. But he does need to find some high class type forwards, or develop some high class type forwards. Physically develop.
What Wales need to do, by the looks of things, is what Fiji did, and start a scrum school. You know, it transformed the Fijian game, and it seems strange, you know, to have to say that about Wales. But it seems to me, if I think that there's one area of his coaching where he has an Achilles heel, it's that he always goes for footballing props. Always over props who can scrummage, as far as I can see, and that's one of the few areas where I've got a bone of contention.
You really hate props who can catch, don't you?
No, I love them.
I think
but I love them to be able to scrummage first, Chris.
Do you know, that's a very good point there, Nick. And you're probably right to a degree, but there's probably reason as well. And if you look at the way that the scrum is refereed today, or actually not refereed, we were very lucky in Wales here against France, because if France had been allowed to scrummage, and, you know, Wales were dealt with because they couldn't scrummage that well against France, then God knows what would have happened. There could have probably been a couple of penalty tries maybe, but the scrum is not refereed. You know, there's a free kick just to get on with it, or there's a play away when the scrum is down, where clearly the opposition go down to prevent them being shoved back 5 meters. So the scrum at the moment is not being, it's the area of the game which is not being refereed. We've also seen the hold up law on the goal line is taken away pretty much nearly all of the scrum fives. So where you had your Adam Joneses, your Gethin Jenkins, your Richard Hibbards, your Matthew Rees, which, you know, these were the Lions front row back in 2013. When you had these guys and other teams as well who could shove the opposition back over the try line, those days are gone because of that law and because referees are not refereeing the scrum. And I think now probably as well, that's probably a factor in, well, what's the point of me picking big front row forwards to scrimmage where we're not going to get the rewards? The French didn't get the rewards that they should have got from the scrum. They got one penalty, I think, against Wales, and then Wales very cleverly stepped off the gas a little bit, and then the French were free kicked for pushing early when they were going to shove Wales back over the goal line. So I think there's a lot more to why there are ball picking props being picked now, maybe instead because players are going. I remember Eddie Jones saying after one game, and he had a very valid point. He said, sometimes you don't want the ball because we don't know what's going to happen in the contact area. We will get penalised. So sometimes it's better to put the ball down in their half and hope that they get penalised down there. So I think there's a lot in that as well. And that's one thing with the areas of the game where I would like to see referees. Look, it's not the referees that collapse a scrum, but it is the referee issue if they don't deal with the issues in the scrum. And I think maybe that's contributing to we're not seeing your scrimmaging forwards pick now, because what's the point? We're not going to get the rewards from it.
Nigel,
That's fascinating, Nigel.
But the thing that really concerns me is, and this is where you've got an insight which certainly none of us do, is what is it in terms of referees, all when it comes to the cardinal laws of the game, all being on the same page so that there is real consistency. I mean, one of the things that England, for example, got away with, I would say, in Lyon on Saturday, was they scrummaged very, very low indeed. And I think that one of the things that they've said is stable and square. And the only way you get that stability is if you get them to pack higher. And so it's these sorts of things. So Angus Gardner, you won't want to, no names, no pack drill, but he allowed that scrummage to be very, very low to the ground.
Well, you're not supposed to set. You shouldn't be any lower than the hip height. So when you set that scrum, we always used to look at it, or I used to look at it, it's like you're hitting above the bullseye on the dartboard. If you're hitting below the bullseye, then you're hitting down, and then something's gonna happen. So you want them to sort of just hit that bullseye or up. You're slightly hitting up, and that's what the law requires. You shouldn't be lower than your hips. We've also seen it. I thought Italy were rewarded in one scrum on the weekend where the loose edge just came out and drove across. Ireland had done it with Porter a couple of times. I thought a couple of penalties, and not because it was Wales, I thought a couple of penalties against Wales in the first half were harsh against Wales because they were just stepping out and driving across. And then the referee thinks, well, the easy option here is the side that's going forward, and that's not quite it. So refereeing of the scrum, I think, is something that really neat, because we can't lose. Nobody wants scrum after scrum in the game. Of course we don't. But still, what makes rugby special is it is a game for all shapes and sizes. And if you think about the huge amount of players at all levels playing the game who are big men and can only play in the front row and nowhere else, unless you're going to keep the scrum an integral part of the game and reward dominant legal scrums, then you're going to lose a lot of players who will be surplus to requirement. And we can't have that happen. So that is one area I think the referees, they just need to referee the scrum and deal with negativity in the scrum, because coaches will find loopholes in everything they do. They'll know, well, with this referee, we can get away with this. Or I remember there was sometimes the French, sometimes when I was to referee them in the European Cup, some of the French teams, all they would do is they'd take one little step forward and then they'd stand up then and they'd look at you and say, right, where's my penalty? Because I've just driven them backwards. You haven't driven them backwards. You've just stood up, and then they were expecting a reward for it. And sometimes a lot of referees, just because there's a little movement forward, they would reward the reward, which was illegal reward. So I think that's an area of the game I think that really needs to have more work done on, and players need to be more positive in it. and referees need to be stronger and deal with the negative, because we can't lose. And I go back to your original point, Nick. It's, you know, if you're picking a front row or a front five or a front row in particular, and you're thinking, well, we've got a referee in the weekend, or you know, whoever that referee may be, he's not going to reward dominant scrum, so we better pick a front five that can move around the field, because that's where we're going to get the benefits. So there could be a reason behind that as well. Who knows?
And if you're scrummaging against 6'5" Antonio, you know, you'd have to almost stand up to be at what his comfortable level is. So actually, why shouldn't you scrummage at your low comfortable level, as long as you're not dipping below the hip level, like you say, Nigel?
Yeah.
You know, Antonio's an extraordinary physical specimen, but he's 6'5", which is not normal for a prop, and he's, you know, he's got huge strength, but the weakness is that if he has to come down to the natural level of the other bloke, it's going to be a bit of a problem for him.
Well, back in the day, that's,
I mean, if I had to scrummage against him, and thank the Lord I don't, sir, I certainly wouldn't scrummage at his height, because you get obliterated.
Yeah, but Genge wasn't scrummaging at hip height. There's no way.
Well, yeah, okay, but what I'm saying is, I absolutely think you should scrummage at the height that's comfortable for you.
But what I'd like to know, Nigel, is when you're an international panel referee, when it comes to the scrum, is there a blueprint as far as World Rugby is concerned, where you've got a checklist of, say, you wouldn't want it to be too long, but say 5 cardinal things that you're looking for every time? And do all referees do it? You know, I mean, that's the question.
I think that what you were seeing in the game as a whole at the moment is far too much technicality. So people expect the referee to be perfect and every decision to be perfect. You can't have it in a game of rugby. So let's take the scrum, for example. So when I was refereeing the scrum, I didn't care if there was a slight angle by the tight head or the loose head. If there's a slight angle, it's not a problem. If there's a big angle and they're driving across, then there's an issue. So if there's a slight angle, I wouldn't be chasing after a slight angle. I'd be chasing after the clear and obvious ones. So my sort of setup, the first key thing is the height, because if you don't get the height right, then you have the hinging and the hitting down, and then you have a scrum collapse. So you get the height right. You then need the stability, because you have to have stability in the scrum, or otherwise it's just going to be moving, and then one side will just push somebody back, and then you haven't got the stability and the ball can't come in. Now, what I'm seeing now in some games is a referee free kicking where there's a couple of millimeters of instability. Just wait. I always just sort of wait a second, because if there's a little movement, when you got all this weight coming together on the set, there's no way they're gonna hit and be perfectly stationary. There's gonna be a slight little movement as they hit, because if one side hits slightly more than the other, then there's gonna be little movement. So you just wait a second, let it settle. So don't panic with, okay, it's not perfectly, but it will stop now. That's fine. So you want the stationary before the ball comes in. And then after that, then it was angles then, and binding. So if you used to sort of, if the loose head was, to me, if the loose head sort of was shoulder was tucked in, then he was always going to step out and drive across. The tight head, then if he was at an angle, he was always going to try and attack the opposition hooker. And then if the hooker was stand up, there's a good chance that the tight head is going across on him, and that's not legal. And then the bind was crucial as well. You know, if you had the loose head whose elbow is pointing straight to the ground, and I'm watching some games now, and they penalise the tight head, and you can clearly see the loose head's elbow pointing to the ground, and the jersey of the tight head is being pulled off his body. Well, there's your answer. Nice and easy, simple. He's pulling him down, and then obviously you look at the tight head then to make sure that he's driving straight. Then he's not short on his bind, so his bind is long. He's not on the arm, and sort of not then pushing up and then bang cranking the loose head down. So you get those main sort of 5 things right. The rest of this, don't worry about if there's a slight angle by the 2 players. That's not a problem, because it's impossible to be perfect.
That's a brilliant exposition. That's a brilliant.
Get those 5 things. I remember going in to do. I was doing England, France out in Paris, and I met with the players. We met the coaches on the day before the game on the Fridays. So I met with the French coach, and I met with the English coach and the captain, Owen Farrell. And then, So they were just asking, they ask in general about a few things. You know, look, we feel, say we feel France is sort of pushing the offside line quite a bit. Could you say, well, okay, yeah, I watched the last game, you got a fair point, so I'll address that. So what I used to do then, I wouldn't let France do it and then say, I got you. I would tell France, look, you need to make sure today that you're behind the offside line. And then a good coach and good players would react to that, and they would do that. So it solved England's problem. It solved a problem for me. And then France would tell me, Nigel, we think that England in the line-out, he told you he was very good at this. We think that in the line-out, when they come down, they tend to work themselves around on the opposite side and get their hands into trying to stop our ball. And they're coming round before the line-out is over, so they're offside. I said, yes, if they do that, they're offside. So I'd address then with England, look, when the line-out is and Maul is forming, and I don't want you to come round until the line-out is over. You can reach round as long as you're onside, but I don't want you working round illegally, you're going to be offside. Fine, and then they'd address that, and it wouldn't happen. So then the change room before the game, and I remember Ellis Gens telling me that he felt that the tight head from France, Nigel is going in on the hooker all the time, so my only option is to come out and go after him, or he's going to kill us. And I said, look, Ellis, I said, you have to trust me to deal with the tight head going in. If I feel the tight head is going in, you've got to stay straight. But I said, yeah, but then he's going to kill me. I'm going to be open. Yes, I appreciate that. But trust me that if I see the tight head going in, I will deal with him. Because if the tight head is going in slightly, but he's not doing anything sort of, too illegal, he's just a slight angle, and then you decide to come out and go after him, what I may be seeing is you coming out. So you need to stay straight. I'll deal with that. And I would tell the French players exactly the same. That tended to work. They'd listen then. They trust you. Okay, if he does go across, he's going to deal with it. And then if I didn't deal with it, then they'd be going, all right, he's not dealing with it. We've got to deal with it. And then you have a problem in the scrum. So that pre-match discussion with the captains and with the coaches on the Friday before the game, and particularly the front rows and the changes before the game, that was key to me. That was hugely important. And what I made sure I did, if I told them, look, you don't try and hit early, because if you do, I'm going to free kick you. If they hit early in the first scrum, I'd free kick them, because I told them in the chair, and they know, right, okay, he's going to do what he said, let's not do it. And then they would adjust to that. So a lot of it is coming down to your man management of the players and preparing as well. Not going into the preconceived ideas, but getting the players then to trust you that you will deal with it. And so
what's fascinating about it is that what is going on is they definitely trying to put preconceived ideas in your head.
Oh, of course they do. Of course they do.
And look, I mean, that may be fascinating in some ways, but I actually wonder whether the dialogue is counterproductive in many ways, because wouldn't it be better for them just to, as far as they understand the laws, to abide by the laws? And you go in, everybody goes in with a clean slate.
I think, and this is where I think, if you over prepare, some referees will watch games and games and games, they'll make notes on individual players, then you're going to get caught out. Then you're going to have preconceived ideas, and you're going to go in and let's say, for example, I don't know, let's say you were reffing Australia, New Zealand, and then you were focusing on what Richie McCaw does in the contact area. So if I went into that game just looking at, like, McCaw does this, I'm going to make sure he doesn't do this, I'm going to watch this. I can guarantee you the flanker from Australia does exactly the same thing, but now you're not picking him up. So you're not refereeing the game fairly. So my preparation was very, very minimal compared to a lot of referees. All I would do would just look at a couple of things I couldn't control. So some of the things I couldn't control was the opposite side of the scrum. So if I was refereeing France-England, I would look at France's game last week and England's game last week, and I would just look at the scrums, just to see if there's a pattern there. And the other one then is the line at the Maul, because it's so much going on there. It's very difficult, somebody joining the other side. If you're in field, you're relying on the assistant referee. So the things that I couldn't sort of control or see myself, I'd have a look at them, just make a couple of notes. And then I'd go in with an open mind. So it wasn't a case of this is, England do this, so I'm going to deal with this. No, it was there if I needed it. And that to me is crucial in getting that balance right. I always found those meetings fascinating, but I also knew what it was all about. I knew that they're going to try. And I said, look, yeah, I would say to yeah, Eddie, I see where you're coming from, but I thought last week, France were very good at staying on their feet. For me, I didn't have any problem with them off their feet last week. And if they do the same this week, then I'm going to be happy with that. So it wasn't a case of, I'm going to be watching this. Yes, I'll do that. No, I always sort of had an open mind about it. And that probably comes down with experience I get. But sometimes, yeah, with a less experienced referee or a referee that that you can get into his head, then you are going to do that. Of course you are, because you're a coach, you're a player, you're going to push those boundaries.
Although rugby does that so much more, doesn't it, Nigel? I mean, I know you get gaming and professionalism in football and cricket, but rugby, because it's so many laws, and these guys spend almost all their time trying to circumvent them in training. There's no sport like it in the world, which must make refereeing almost impossible, because that's what they're doing a lot of the time. How can we cheat this law?
Yeah, and you're right. And we saw it on the weekend as a great example here for you. So I had a bit of a lively discussion with Martin Johnson, as I love doing, after the game. So if you looked, so the goal line dropout was brought in to try and prevent the continuous pick and goes on the try line when nobody spreads the ball wide. They're just going to barge themselves over. One, it's not attractive unless it's your team who are going to score. And as well, it brings it more collisions, which we're trying to sort of reduce in the game to try and get players to actually try and beat men instead of running through them to try and, from a safety point of view as well. So they brought this goal line drop on in. So two things, it hasn't done that. I'm not watching games and going, the pick and goes are less. I don't think they are. If they are, they're very, very, very limitedly less. So I'm not seeing, they're still trying to barge themselves over. So that law hasn't done what they were hoping it would do. What it's also done is brought a sense of negativity. So if you looked at the game, the Wales-Italy game, Wales's first try, I think it was, where Elliot D was short of the line, he was actually then picked up illegally by the Italian and dragged over the goal line. What that Italian player was trying to do was drag him over the goal line on top of him. The ball is held up. We will now have a drop of 22. So in a law that was brought in to try and open the game up, one, it hasn't done that. And two, players' defense now are looking now and found a loophole. Let's try and drag them over and keep them up so we get the goal and drop of 22. You'd never do that before. You'd tackle to drive them back. So you're right. And this is why they have to be very careful when you look at law changes, because when you look at the law change, you have to think about what effect it will have by the end of the season. A classic example was, I was in a room with a discussion where some of the hierarchy in the game say, look, there's too many penalties in the game. We're seeing games being kicked and won by penalties. We've got to reduce the penalty to 2 points or 1 point. Oh, yes, that's a great idea. There'll be less penalties. And I said, okay, hang on. So if you're going to kick a penalty and get 1 or 2 points, or you can score a try by scoring 5 points and 2 points, which make it 7 points, what do you think the defense are going to do? They will be a lot more negative in killing the ball because they'll rather give 1 or 2 points away than give 7 points away. Oh yeah, we didn't think of that. So all of a sudden, so you've got to think about sometimes when you bring in law changes. Now, the 50-22, I think is pretty positive. I don't think we've seen any excess kicking because of it. But what we are seeing now is good, accurate kicking. I don't think it's opened up the game as much as we're hoping it was. That's a lot to do with the contact area because we're not keeping players on their feet. So you look at some instances in the games of the weekend, there's a tackle, you have 3 or 4 attacking players going in to protect the ball, and you'll have 1 defender in there. Common sense will tell you now you've got 14 defenders lined up against 12 numbers attacking. there's not going to be any space. So if you want more space, you need to referee the law, keep players on the feet in the ruck, so you're actually having a contest, which means they're going to absorb more players in there. So it opens up the defense a bit. So the 50-22 hasn't really done that, but it hasn't brought any negative effect to the game. So that law changes. It's a pretty decent and a fair change, because it has brought a little bit of excitement and a little bit more skill in actually, you know, it's picking to get that 50-22. So that's why it's important, I think, sometimes, and all of us probably, when we're all calling for a law change, sometimes you have to think. You know, there are, I think, I don't want to go on too long here, but there are some law changes, I think, which, for me, the caterpillar ruck is an issue in the game, the box kicking. There are 3 things here that you can do, which I don't think will have a negative effect. First of all, it's already in law. So if you look at the games now, what the law tells you is the referee should call use it when the ball is available. It shouldn't call use it when it's already on the way back to the caterpillar ruck. So once it's available, the referee says use it. So referees need to quicken up. Some referees are taking 2, 3, 4 seconds too long before calling use it. So the referee calls his use it. Once it's available, you now have 5 seconds. That's going to quicken things up a bit. Or you change that law and bring it down to 3 seconds, which will quicken it up even again. Or you could look at, and you probably need to trial this, because I'm not sure if there'll be any adverse effect to it. Or you could look at saying, once that ball is available and the referee says use it, the ball has to go. So the referee then, once it's available, says use it, the ball is gone. So there are 3 law changes there, which you can quite simply look at to bring a positive effect to the game, which probably won't bring any negative effects. And that is something that I think they really need to look at, because the caterpillar ruck now is just becoming a bit of a joke, and it's just more endless kicking in the game because of it.
I mean, another thing on unintended. Come on, Chris.
I was going to say, everything that Nigel said just reinforces my view that the defining characteristic of a great referee is understanding the scrums. Nigel, Ed Morrison, Sean Fitzpatrick, the best 3 referees rugby has ever seen. And I was also going to suggest to Nigel, after everything he said about the scrum, why the hell aren't any front row players referees? But then it strikes me that they'd have to change the referee after 50 minutes, wouldn't they?
That's true, and also as well, you'd be surprised. I've sat down with quite a few front row players, some top quality front row players, and I've showed them 4 scrums, and after 3 scrums, they go, I don't know who took that down. So the thought that the next front row player will understand the scrum, believe me, I know a couple of front row players who are refereeing. They are bloody hopeless at refereeing the scrum. So that doesn't work. Trust me.
Excellent.
Yeah, in the front row forwards who could get around the field are hookers.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, Kano, going back to what you were saying about footballing props, I suspect you would have loved Dan Cole's performance on Saturday, because he had 1 carry for a total of 0 meters, which I'd imagine is a
get in there.
Right up your street.
Yeah, but I'd also like to say that although I've said what I've said about Ellis Genge regarding the scrum, you're going to do what you can do in order to nullify an opponent like Antonio, and he did it well. But also the pass that he gave to Earl that created the break was a sign of a very good footballing prop.
Do you think, Nigel? I mean, sometimes in my more radical moments, I sort of think that there shouldn't be any scrum cadence at all. There shouldn't be any scrum sequence. If you look back at the old golden age that some of us old gits do, you look back at 71 and 74, the scrums happened when everyone was there. And because the ruck was in the game, the forwards were generally there. And they banged up and they engaged almost under their own...
Yeah, they engaged
under their own steam. And there wasn't a hit. No. I mean, it was hard enough in there once the scrum was active, i.e. immediately on engagement.
Absolutely.
But there wasn't a hit. Do you think the scrums are any safer because of the existence of the scrum process?
That's a very good question. What I think the scrums are at the moment is the way that it's set up at the moment, it has taken away that huge hit of players coming together. And if you got that wrong, with that force, it could be dangerous. So I certainly think from a safety point of view, it is safer. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the scrums are better now, as far as an outcome of them and completion of them. But I certainly think that less huge hit you had.
Yeah.
This is why the Ospreys were very, very good scrumming side, as were Wales at that time, when you had the likes of Adam Jones and that front row. When that hit was in, what they were doing very well, they were hitting, and as they were hitting with that power, because of the size of the forwards, before the ball came in, they already had a slight momentum. So once the ball came in, it was just a continuation of annihilating the other side. So when they changed that law from a safety point of view, that you had to be stationary, the Ospreys and Adam Jones probably lost his edge a little bit then, because that you had from a standing start, so that it was more of an equal contest. They didn't have that momentum then. So that changed a lot in that time. But I certainly think the scrums are safer from that. The only thing I would say now is, and I'm watching some games and I sort of look at the scrums and going, right, some referees' cadences are very, very long. So they're keeping the players, so they call the crouch, there'll be quite a bit of time before they call the bind, and then quite a bit of time before they call the set. So the players are down there now, waiting and ready. And it's a little bit like then your 100 meters in the Olympics. You know, the longer you're down there waiting, the more chances if you're going to make a mistake and make a false start. So I think by the referees quickening that cadence up a little bit will probably help. Is there scope to look at, do we need that so much cadence? Do we need them there to be down that long and all this before they come together? That is something I think they could look at. Maybe just crouch and just set could be fine, as long as we haven't got that huge hit coming together, which becomes then a safe. That's what you need to really avoid. So I think there are little things they can look at. But then the only thing I will say to people is, and to be fair to referees here as well, and we've got some good quality referees out there, is when you have some games where there are good quality scrums, that will tell you that there can't be much wrong with the laws of the game when we do have quality scrums, because the scrums are working in this game. So a lot of it comes down to the players at the end of the day. It's the way that they coach. Are they coached to hit down and win the penalty? Yes, they probably are. We're naive, we don't think so. Are they going to try and, you see it in games now, a side will, I thought Wales got away with it. Whether they actually did it, I don't know, but they certainly got away with it. On that 5 meter line, they just they didn't take the hit. And whether they did stand back or not, but then it made it look like France were driving early and the referee free kicks them. So there are things that teams will do there to get away with things in the game. So, on the most, the laws of the game are fine. What we need is just to have players to be positive and referees to deal with the negative when they are not playing within the laws of the game, and also to referee, because if you look at the contact area, it quite clearly says in the laws quite clearly, you cannot deliberately collapse a ruck. Yet what are we seeing? Players being pulled off their feet, prevent them winning a jackal or winning a turnover, or pulling them off their feet we can't compete the ruck anymore, now the ruck is dead. You have the numbers now all out in defense. So we just sometimes need to look at the laws and say, look, we need to be stronger. We need to referee this law, because the benefits of it will add positiveness to the game.
And with the choke tackle, Nigel, I mean, this is a real beef of mine. You can't collapse a Maul. It's a cardinal sin. You cannot collapse a Maul unless the referee shouts Maul, and then you collapse it.
Well, the attacking team can't take it down, but the defending team can.
Explain the logic of any of that.
Yeah, to me, that again, I don't understand why they haven't looked at that law, because to me, it's just a negative ploy. And all it does really, what it's doing is doing a couple of things. It's encouraging the defense to have a 2-on-1 tackle and encouraging players to tackle upright, high, in order to hold players up. So if you got rid of that law, it would hopefully then encourage players to actually tackle lower, is what we are trying to get them to do, without actually putting that in in law, which is another issue. So to me, the holding up the maul in rugby at the moment, although rugby has to be a fair contest to both sides, the benefit of the doubt, that little slight advantage, should always be to the attacking side. It shouldn't be weighed heavily towards the defensive side, because you want to encourage the attack of the game, not encourage defense. Is great, big tackles, of course, is part of the game, but that slight element of doubt should always go to the reward. We've always done it, even before the TMO. If a try wasn't scored, but you're 90% sure it is scored, the benefit of the doubt goes to the attacking side. That's what rugby should be about. And to me, holding up the maul is rewarding the defense and not rewarding the attack. It also encourages players to tackle upright, which is something we try to avoid. So that is another law that I would really look at and get rid of that.
On laws, Nigel, tell me this, because being an old bastard, I spend most of my waking hours trying to uninvent the wheel. So I campaign to get rid of tactical substitutions and all the things I know aren't going to happen. But one of the things we bang on about on this podcast quite a lot is, and rugby's phenomenal in terms of its skills and its fitness and its application and all that kind of thing. But is it pie in the sky just to hope that the ruck, as you and I would have understood it back in the day, i.e. a numbers game around the ball, thereby creating space out wide, people staying on their feet, going past the ball, is that gone forever now?
Well, it's going to be a huge shift in actually bringing back the refereeing of the ruck from a coaching point of view, because obviously there's been a huge shift in coaching as well. I think there's a couple of simple things you can do. I think we need to stop players pulling people off their feet. The croc roll, for example. Or once a jackal gets in on the ball, what the defense does then, he grabs the jackal and pulls him to ground. All you have then is a dead ruck, so nobody needs to compete. And the referee will say, ruck over or contest over. I did it myself. And then nobody then competes anymore. So you haven't got the numbers in. So there are a couple of little things I think you can do there, which are quite simple. One, make it illegal for you to pull a player or pull the jackal off the ball. If you want to go in underneath him or go in and try and drive him backwards, which means you're staying on your feet, then that's fine, but you can't pull him down off the ground. Get rid of this croc roll immediately. It should be illegal anyway. So those little things I think will help then in getting, because if you look at some games, you will have players, you'll have 3 or 4 defenders, 3 or 4 attackers on their feet, all competing to win that turnover ruck. And when that ball comes away, you have space. You'll see tries scored from it. So there are little things I think we can do, which could easily then naturally bring that back without having a huge shift.
And that's if we get the danger card thrown at us, Nigel. But when you get those fantastic dynamic counter rucks, and there's normally 3 or 4 on each side, it all comes alive. It's suddenly you've got a fantastic contest. People are going in and committing, and as you say, you've suddenly got space around the fringes and out wide.
And that used to be the game. Used to be the game.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, some of us would have the jackler out of the game tomorrow.
Yeah, and
I think the jackal position is horrible.
That is probably one of the dangerous positions you could be in, and that is one thing. I think they'd have to look at this and trial it to see how the game would look. But I think there certainly is a case for looking at, do we, unless you come in to actually, as a scrum half or somebody to play the ball and pick it up and drive through, how can we get rid of the jackal? And it's probably difficult to do that, because then does that mean that anybody coming into that ruck cannot play the ball and must stay on the feet and not touch the ball just to protect? I don't know. So, but there is, if we could get rid of that jackal, particularly in the positions that they land up in, I certainly think that would make the game safer, and I think it would help the game. But I really think there needs to be a sit down and see, how can we do this, and is it going to be workable? Because that is the big question mark.
Very interesting, Nigel. I mean, one of the things that the only question that I have out of what's been said is when you're talking about the maul, how do you compete at a maul anymore? I mean, you're seeing the kick to the for the 5 meter line out constantly. Then you're seeing teams, you know, serially penalized in defense until eventually the attacking side is going to score. And, you know, the Maul seems to me to be an area where we've got it very badly wrong, because it's very difficult. How do you compete at a Maul? If the ball is able, if you're able to have basically offside with players not attached to the ball as a flanks in front of it, and you cannot get to where the ball is in the Maul, it's you know, it's a gimme. You know, they're going to rumble 20, 25 meters down the field or whatever. So there has to be something. The ball used to have to be held in contact with the opposition more.
Stop anyone feeding the ball back. So if you've got a line out, the guy who takes the ball in the line out and sets the ball must stay in possession.
Well, he must. You can have
doesn't go back to the hooker.
They all need to be in contact. That's absolutely right. And that's the problem, is that now what you've got is basically obstruction.
Yeah. That was another reason for the goal line dropper being brought in, was to try and reduce the amount of those mauls close to the try line, to prevent that, you know, the risk of being held up. Again, it hasn't worked. It hasn't changed that. It hasn't changed any team from not going for that line out on the maul. So the Maul is a very, very difficult area to referee at the moment, to be fair to referees. And on whole, they referee it pretty well, because it's impossible to referee. Sometimes there's so much going on in there. So the problem you have is this. And the referees have clamped down on it, in all fairness, this year, and it is much better. So what you have the ball, you have the guy being lifted up in the line out. He catches the ball, he comes down. What those two support jumpers are doing then, they were sliding behind him. So it is impossible for you now to get at the ball carrier. So it was very difficult for you to sack a Maul immediately, because the law allows you to do that, because you're making a tackle, because you couldn't get at the ball carrier, because you can't sack a support jumper because you're tackling play without the ball. So that's the technicality of the law. So you saw a lot of that coming in. So referees clamped down on that. What they did then was, again, we're looking at these loopholes that coaches do. What they did then was they decided, well, because we can't put players now to shield the ball catcher, what they were doing then was they were long arm transferring. So they were actually giving the ball back on a long arm to the next player, who then get the ball and then run into the player who now no longer had the ball, yet causing obstruction, but yet impossible to defend. So what we need is strong refereeing, which in all fairness, they are doing, I feel, on the whole, although sometimes it is difficult, is to prevent that blocking. So players should clearly be at the side. They can't be behind the catcher at all. Also as well, when you come down with that ball, the guy who comes in needs to get it from you. He then should be having to pass that ball back, not just slide back with the ball to the back of the Maul, which is then impossible to defend. So there are things in that law which can help the defense of the Maul. And that's what I think we need to look at, is make sure that we do stay strong on that and referee that. And in all fairness, I think the referees are doing a pretty decent job of that, but it's a very difficult area to defend, as you said. The problem then with, people say, well, get rid of them all. The problem with that, you can't do, that's an important part of the game. But what the Maul does do, it sucks players in. It pretty much sucks 16 forwards in to a huddle.
Absolutely.
We now have space.
It used to be.
What we need somehow is, now we have that space, we need now to get this ball out a bit quicker.
It used to be a grappling contest. That's what it was. It was and it used to attract it like a magnet. It would attract the 8 forwards from both sides. And the reason it attracted the 8 forwards from both sides was because the law was, if you were going forward, you would get the scrum put in. And, when you talk about the tinkering with laws, that thing about the side going forward in the physical contest, getting a reward for it, was absolutely critical. when that changed, it led to the fragmentation. So you got flatline defenses, so on and so forth. So these things are the laws of unintended consequences are huge.
I'll give you another one, and we saw it with the Bernal tackle. The insistence of having to go in lower now because of less head contact. When you've got a 22-stone guy running at you and he's down low, to avoid head contact, you have to go so low that you can't wrap. And like that, those England back row boys, and I would include Courtney Laws from last season, they are pretty textbook tacklers, to be fair. Only Tom Curry in that Argentina match blotted his copybook. They go low and hard. But the reason they're going so low is to avoid the head contact of a bloke who's only 18 inches above the ground. So, and that is very difficult to ref, because there were some pictures at the weekend of Bundy Aki making a brilliant tackle on Van der Merwe. And he's had problems in the past, hasn't he? He's got a couple of cards for high tackles, and he's gone so low that he's actually gone on his knees. And this picture has been, all around social media and praise. It's actually an illegal tackle. And I was watching Spain-Romania last night, and their number 2 got binned at the end for making an identical tackle as the Bundy Aki tackle, which was being set up as, this is the example of the player of the tournament. This is how you tackle. So it's almost impossible for players these days.
Yeah, it is. I agree with you, Brendan. And I had this conversation with somebody on social media yesterday about it, a bit of common sense here. What that law is, because they quote the law then, you can't be on the ground making a tackle. But what the law is if a player is actually fallen on the ground, is flat on the ground, or is there after one tackle, what he can't do then is just reach out and tackle another player before getting back on his feet. That's what that law was for. That law was not for to penalise a guy who, as he tackles, his knees touches the ground. Although technically his knees on the ground, but that's not what the law was for. So then common sense needs to apply. When they brought in, they're talking about lowering the tackle height. Now, I've got to say, in all fairness, the community game, that hasn't seemed to be a problem here in Wales. But after saying that, the head contact and the high tackles was not a problem in the community game anyway. It's only at the sort of professional end of the game where we were having these huge head contacts and having to lower the tackle. What coaches do then is, when you were trying to bring in lowering the tackle, so if they would say tomorrow they would change now in the next international match or in the Premiership on the weekend, they say, right, tomorrow you've got to tackle below the waist. I can guarantee you every ball carrier will be running into a defender, running down into him, making it impossible for him to tackle him anywhere but above the waistline. So it's very, very difficult sometimes to implement changes or laws, because it's just not doable. And I think sometimes, if a player is going down, so Bundy Aki, for example, to me that was a great tackle. As his knee hits the ground and he wraps, that's fine. That's the law was not meant to penalise that. It was meant to if Gallagher was lying on the floor from previously and then reaches out, that's what the law was for, to get him back on his feet before he does the tackle. So in this instance, it's play on. Now, if a player actually drops to his knees and waits for somebody to come to him, then we have a different discussion. That's different, because you're actually on the floor now waiting for somebody to come to you, rather than actually hitting it simultaneously as you make a tackle. And it's the same thing with the wrap. What the foul play law is, we don't want to see players running into somebody leading with the shoulder and the arm is down by the side. He's just making into the shoulder. That's what the law of foul play is for. That's what we don't want. If a player, his shoulder hits, but his arm is actually on the way to be making the wrap, then that shouldn't be foul play. That's different. It's just a timing issue. Yes, my shoulder hit, but I had to go so low, my arm was down, it was on the way up, then that becomes something different. So when you stick to the technicalities of the law, you're going to impossible to have a game. It's a little bit like, you're driving down the M4 doing 71 miles an hour.
In a golf buggy.
In a golf buggy. With the orange lights flashing above. You're not going to get you try to avoid doing 71, but you're not going to get stopped and get a ticket for doing 71 miles an hour. That's not what the speed limit was for. The speed limit is tell you, don't go down there doing 80 or 85 or way over the speed limit. You're going to get booked. But if you're doing 71, just because your foot has touched the throttle a little bit too strong, then you drive on. And it's the same here. If your knee glances the ground as you're making a tackle, you play on. And
so, that was my slight issue with the Earl. Now, I accept that was a 50-50 call. I actually think it was a 51-49 call. I think he was going so low in an attempt not to give a penalty away for a high hit. But the bigger point is that for 78 minutes, Gardner had reffed that situation pretty well, I thought. And he was allowing a certain amount of leeway there. And that was okay. He saw it. He thought it was okay. The French guys didn't react to it. But then so that's the interpretation that has lasted for 78 minutes. And then TMO comes in with his interpretation, and we have to accept that it was very, very close to being, in anybody's eyes, a penalty. But he comes in with a second interpretation, which seems to be superimposed on the interpretation that had been going on for 78 minutes. And again, that makes life really, really difficult for players.
And I think that's the key about refereeing is consistency. So if you have similar situations which you haven't refereed or haven't dealt with in the game because you feel, okay, it is 50-50, it's tight, but I'm happy with it, so I'm not going to deal with it, then you have to do that for the whole game. If you penalised that in the last minute, then you've got to penalise in the first minute if it happens as well. Absolutely. So we can, people have different views. People will say, well, look, I think his arm was down because he had to go so low. It had to be down there, and then he was going to come and wrap. So we think it's okay. Others will say, well, actually, no, there was no attempt to wrap at all. So it's a shoulder charge. So it's a penalty. So you're going to have different views on something like that, which is going to split people's opinions on it, which is fine. But the key thing is, you can't, and I'm not saying that this is the case here, but you've got to be consistent. You can't, it's a bit like, I remember I coached a few referees, and I remember sitting down with one a couple of months ago and saying, what are you doing? You have allowed, we won't go into this because I've got to go. You've allowed the scrum crooked feed all game, and then you decide in the 76th minute to free kick one. What are you doing? Yeah, but it's not straight, Nigel. I know it's not straight, but so are the other 10. So either penalise the other 10 or don't penalise.
But that raises a big point, Nigel, and it's to do around the game clock and everything. We hear on TV commentary all the time. Ben Kay, twice a week, will say, they've got to be careful here trying to run this clock down, or they've got to be careful doing this, they've got to be careful doing that, because the referees will be watching this really carefully now. And that's a suggestion that you're refereeing differently at the back end of a game, at the very business end of a game, not consciously, subconsciously, you are super alert to transgressions. And I'm just wondering if that's not a reaction or a consequence of the game clock when everyone knows this is the last play, or we're very close to the last play. Players, I'm sure, defend differently. I think players certainly attack differently. I'm just wondering if you think that subconsciously referees referee differently at the back end.
Yeah, I think so. I did as well. I'm not saying that I referee differently, but certainly your awareness. So if you're refereeing a game and there's 20 points difference in the game, you're going to be a little bit more sort of relaxed refereeing that last 5 minutes. So I remember reffing France-Ireland out in Paris in 2018 after the 46 phases of Sexton dropped a goal. I knew now time is up. We're in the next, whatever decision now I make or not make next is going to have an outcome on this game. So I was totally focused now. I've got to make sure that anything that I penalise is nailed on. And I've got to make sure as well that I don't penalise something which I haven't penalised for the game. So your awareness does change. It's the same as a player. You probably look at players who probably would have given a couple of penalties away in the first 20 minutes of the game. For some reason, they're so disciplined they won't give it away in the last couple of minutes because they know. So the player's mindset changes, the referee changes as well. But in that focus and in that mindset, you've still got to make sure that you still referee consistently, even though you're switched on to get right. If there is a clear offence here, I've got to make sure that I get and I don't miss it. Because if I have missed one in the first half, it's because I just didn't see it, rather than I'm okay with it. And this, so it does. It definitely does change that mindset. It does alert you and switch you on. I always have this discussion with a good friend of mine, Barnsley, Wayne Barnes. I always have this discussion and debate with him. Barnsley was, I always let the players decide the end of the game. Don't decide it as a referee. So I'm not going to penalise something right at the end of the game, unless it jumps out and everybody's going, you have to. And I always said to him, yeah, but just remember now, as you said, is if there is an offence and you decide not to blow the whistle, you are deciding the ending of the game. So whether you blow the whistle or don't blow it, you're still deciding the outcome of the game. Just because you haven't penalised somebody and a player then drops the goal or doesn't get a chance to kick the 3 points that he clearly should have had, you have decided that, not the player, because you decided not to penalise him. So what you have to do at the end of the game, and this is where it becomes your experience and becomes very difficult area to referee, is you have to maintain that consistency, but you also have to make sure that you do penalise the clear and the obvious. You have to get those nailed on decisions. And if you haven't got it in the beginning of the game and you chose not to, then that's down to your inconsistency as a referee, because yes, you penalise at the end of the game, but you missed one here, but it's a nailed on, you should have got it. And that becomes questioning your consistency within that game. But you're right, there is no doubt that at the end of the, God, I was involved in that game. I was involved then in Harlequins, and when Nick Evans kicked one after about 34 phases against Stade Francais in the Quins to win the game. I was then involved in Munster Northampton in Thomond Park when O'Gara 45 phases to win the game. I remember coming off the game and somebody telling me after that Ireland France game coming off, and I can't remember one of the people in the tunnel said to me, "Oh, bloody hell, Nigel! Wow, look at the pressure on Sexton at the end of the game kicking that drop goal." And I said to him, "What about the fucking pressure on me refereeing in the last 5 minutes, knowing that whatever I do or not do is probably going to have an outcome of the game?" And that's all.
And in the Harlequins case, of course, you've got the added problem of working class solidarity. I mean, you didn't want them to win, did you?
Derek Bevan was my TMO in that game. I actually went to the TMO. My gut feeling was it's over, but I thought I had a bit of drama.
It was a flapper, wasn't it? He didn't hit it at all well.
He didn't, and it was and I thought, no, that's over. But I thought, oh Christ, I better check. So I went to Derek Bevan, and Bevan was in the track and going to me. He goes, because you can press speak to the mic when nobody else can hear you. When he presses the button, and goes, "What the bloody hell are you coming from me for? You know that's over," he said. Lads, listen, it's been great talking to you. I've got cows to feed.
I was gonna say, I know we've slightly overrun for your time. Do you think I could?
No problem.
Your player of the championship very quickly. I won't ask you the other two.
Oh, hang on, no, you haven't asked me a question. Unfortunately, it's not a Welshman. Player of the championship. Let me have a think. Let me have a quick think now. Do you know who I'll go for? Because I think they've missed him. They missed him in the 2 games he hasn't played, and that is what is it? The centre for Scotland. Oh God, what's his name?
Oh, Tupelotu.
Tupelotu.
Yeah,
I think he's been key to Scotland. I think he's their key player. I think, and I think they missed him. Finn Russell, I think, missed him as well because he had that extra something outside of him. I think he's been in key. I think the French scrum half who came on who played against Wales and played against England on the weekend as well.
Yeah.
When you think that they're missing the best player in the world, DuPont, and that they probably
thank God they found themselves a scrum half at last.
Oh, and they got another next best player in the world now, probably. So, yeah, I think. I can't anybody else that stands out in my mind. Funnily enough, I haven't seen much of the Irish games this year because obviously I've been working with BBC on the game. So, and I've been traveling, so I haven't really watched much of the Irish games, to be honest.
I mean, Bundyaki would be a similar.
Bundyaki,
Scotland's been very good for them in the same way.
James Lowe as well has been very good.
And I'm on that sense, I because Bundyaki's probably played the whole tournament. Probably, I would probably go for Bundyaki then. I think, but those 2 centres are key. I think, particularly for the way the game is played and for an outside half these days, for sure.
Yeah, and I tell you what, obviously you've just named two 12s there. Very soon in the next week or two on the podcast, we'll be picking our composite British and Irish Lions team for 2025. That is going to be a shootout and a half, with Ollie Lawrence obviously coming and raising his hand as well between Aki and Tuipulotu. So yeah, anyway, sorry. Thank you for indulging us there, Nigel. But by all means, absolutely get going, and we really appreciate your time. And it's
my pleasure. And nice to see you all. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody. Bye-bye.
Take care, Nigel. Bye. Oh, wow.
It's an episode on its own, that one. Almost.
I was going to say, well, yeah, I apologise to all the Irish fans who are just recovering from their Paddy's Day weekend and expecting.
They won't be awake yet. Don't worry about it.
That's potentially true, to be fair. Look, let's do a little bit of a rundown on the other two games of the weekend, and then we'll do our player of the tournament, etc. I'm actually about to run out of battery, so I'm going to have to plug my laptop in a second. Ireland, Scotland. Obviously, Ireland back-to-back championships. Guys, is this now a great side in the grand scheme of things as well? Obviously, people say you need a World Cup. I think the example that comes to mind in terms of New Zealand of the 2000s didn't win a World Cup. So I think they can be in the conversation for that. But are they cemented?
Oh, yeah. I think that they're a great side. We didn't see them at their very best in the last two matches, one of which they lost, one of which they won. And as the saying goes, when you win and you're not playing absolutely at full tilt, that's a bit of a sign. But, they've done pretty well over the last 2 years. What they've done absolutely seamlessly is replace Sexton. And really, there's no Sexton talk whatsoever anymore. So that's a pretty big plus for Ireland, just bleeding him into the team.
Yeah, I think it's sort of the last. In a way, it's the last 3 years, because they pushed France pretty hard 3 years ago as well. So, the bubble was burst a bit. It's very interesting when you look at the last side that did a 20, that did a Grand Slam and then won a championship, albeit losing to Ireland in the final game in Dublin, was in 2016 England. Now, I would say that they are a better team, certainly a better team to watch than that England team was. But I don't see them as one of the all-time great teams. I think that they're a very, very good team, but I don't see them as greats.
I think they're one of the all-time great Ireland teams. I mean, just slightly
without it.
It's the best side they've ever had.
Yeah, for sure. Most consistently great side they've had.
Surely to God. I think one of the keys to it, and I think, is selection consistency. Now, I know it's easier when things are going well, and you're not forced into doing something. You don't have the public clamour, something must be done, which is England are up against that stuff all the time. And France have messed around with their selection and all that kind of thing. If you look at one of the most one of the outstanding sports sides in the world for year after year after year after year is the Australian cricket team. They do not change their side. These are our best 11 players in all conditions. And we're not going to muck about with it. And when somebody's better, genuinely better than the guys we got in here, we'll consider making a change. That's why so many of them don't make their debut for Australia until their late 20s. They can't get in. They don't mess about with their selection, and Ireland haven't messed about with their selection, let them be forced. They made a big call on Ryan, and they brought in McCarthy, but that's about it. They lost Hansen, so they had to find a new wing. They lost Ringrose to injury, so they made a change there. But basically, they go from match to match to match, knowing who their best side is, and that's a massive advantage. I think they've also had an advantage in this Six Nations of Josh van der Fleer, who I thought had fallen off a little bit from his level last year. He is now playing the house down again. Looks very, very good again. And I've nothing but respect for him. I think they're an outstanding side and very, very well led by Farrell.
Having said that, I thought they had moments of fortune on Saturday. They're trying the second half. I've looked at that a couple of times now. It's industrial level of obstruction from the two blokes on the side of the hooker as he takes it in. And how that was any more obviously a try than the two that were disallowed on the TMO. And I'm perplexed. And the only reason they were actually there was if you go right back the other end of the field, Ireland had dropped the ball in their 22, knocked it forward. Scotland had picked it up, done a couple of passes, and got intercepted by Ringrose and ran up the pitch. It should have been a scrum and it'd been the first time they'd been in the 22 in 30 minutes, but it should have been a scrum, an attacking scrum for Scotland. So they got a little bit lucky there.
But I mean, Scotland were enormously combative.
They were very brave.
They did react very, very positively to the Rome result, and I think Gregor Townsend was right to talk with some pride about that performance. So they were difficult. They were really difficult, and Ireland were coming off a defeat. And
the championship should be difficult, shouldn't they?
Well, of course it should. Of course it should.
Grand Slams doubly so.
They hold themselves together. One or two of their big players really, really stood up, but particularly up front. I thought Porter was pretty damn good on the weekend. Yeah, they're good winners of the tournament. They were the best side in the tournament, for sure.
Yeah. And to be fair, I don't think we've seen the best of them since probably the second game, when they nilled Italy.
Yeah.
So I think.
I mean, it looks like they're going to lose Omani, doesn't it? There just seems to be a bit of an air around the fact that he'll pack it in.
But I don't think that's such a bad thing in terms of the captaincy, because obviously he's not the captain to see them through to 2027. And I think Doris, who may well be a candidate for Lions captaincy next year, can now have a decent run of it with Ireland before then as well.
Are we assuming that Ryan Baird will be their sixth? When Omani goes, I mean, he's an exciting player, Baird.
Unless they put Conan at 8 and revert Doris to 6, but Doris is
an 8. He doesn't play well at 6.
He's much less effective at 6.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, they have been the best side in the championship, and like we said, I mean, their points difference shows that. I think they ended on plus 90, which obviously is in a game where 10 of the 15 games were won by 4 points or fewer. Sorry, in a championship where 10 of the 15 games were. That's a pretty damn good points difference.
That says a lot for the championship as well, man. That's
the 10 out of the 15. Well, this is one thing I wanted to ask, is obviously, like I alluded to at the start, this has been a bloody good Six Nations. But, our predictions league has been a disaster. But I think rather than, I'm sort of trying to salvage some semblance of credibility here, but rather than that being a reflection on us, hopefully, it's more of a reflection on the fact that the Six Nations and international rugby now is in about as competitive a place as we've ever seen it.
Yeah. Some interesting little stats, just to, I think, sort of back up in one way or another. The Scottish points difference this season was 0. The Scottish penalties, the difference between the penalties they conceded and the penalties they won was minus 30, and the next worst was minus 3 by England. So Scotland did a lot of damage to themselves, which tells a story. Italy got more points in the league table this season than they have collectively in the last 10 seasons.
Yeah.
Wow. That's
how good Italy's season was, and they were robbed of 2 in Paris.
Yeah.
So do you ever get out at all, Brendan?
Just taking a keen interest in proceedings, Chris.
Oh no, I love those stats, Chris.
I'm not really a stats man, but I thought they were quite good stats.
Oh, I am. I love them. Chris definitely isn't. Chris famously gets out a lot by the sounds of things. Then,
well, stats. I used to have this argument in the very dim and distant past when I was working on the Bristol Evening Post, and the rugby and cricket correspondent at that time. My predecessor in that role was a big stats guy. And he would say, when the end of season cricket statistics came out, because cricket was far more statistically driven than rugby was, he'd say, right, now let's see the true story of who did what. And you say, well, all right, well, Jeff Boycott will be at the top of the stats, but he may well have lost a few games for his team. I mean, individually, he's done pretty well. But he may have, cost his team victory by batting too slowly or whatever it is. I see the value of stats.
I actually
agree. But I'm not sure that you can completely rely on them. Gloriously, sport is still primarily the human element.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about relying on stats, there was a something that was said earlier on in the podcast about we were calling for Italy to be kicked out of the Six Nations not long ago. Dead right. And,
no, actually, I've never called for that.
And I have. There was no, there was no defence for them, really being sort of 24 years in the way in which they have. And I did, because Chris mentioned that the French were exactly the same when they first came in to the Five Nations, and actually they weren't. The French ratio, I think, in their sort of first 10 years was 1 in 5. They'd win 1 in 5. Italy's is about 1 in 10. So Italy have had a very, I think that they've had a pretty fair run. I think that they've been given a fair chance, and thank heavens they've actually seized it, or they appear now to have seized it. So
my take on it, Nick, has always been you don't just throw them out. There are people who think who have argued that we should go back to the Five Nations.
Yeah,
and that I think is ludicrous. But the notion of Italy finished bottom, or on this occasion Wales, should be playing Georgia.
Yeah, and Wales should be playing Georgia. Would be very worried playing Georgia.
That's what we were talking about regarding Italy.
Yeah,
we weren't talking about them being heaved out.
No, indeed.
To reappear. We were talking about a meritocracy. Yeah. And so I make no apologies for that at all. I'm delighted. I think that the real sea change in this tournament has been that they are competitive, and it looks as if they will remain competitive.
Well, I think Saturday was testament to their depth, because obviously Ange Capuozzo got injured in the game the weekend before against Scotland, but Lorenzo Pani had a fantastic game. So
yeah, he's been ripping it up for Zebra. Not a lot of people watch.
Well, I mean,
he's been fantastic for Zebra all season.
They have a genuine cutting edge in attack.
Yeah,
and it's been a long time since we could claim that for them.
Yeah,
and I mean, one of the the big players of the tournament in a way has been Ignacio Brex.
Oh, crikey!
Yeah.
But that's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I know we always have this discussion about what we want from our 12s and 13s, but Brex, that power game he can bring to it, and I'm not saying Melancello is. I mean, he's a pretty powerful bloke himself, but Brex at 13, I think looks really, really impressive. Really impressive, and it's not just it's something different from the knee-jerk coaching. He's a big bloke, we'll play him at 12 and we'll bang him up over the game, and that's what he's going to be there to do.
Look at
the Jamie Roberts theory of life. Well, there are two things there. One, Jamie Roberts could do a hell of a lot more than that, but Gatland chose to use him in that way. But I remember Jamie at fullback, and he had a full range of skills.
Yeah.
But Brex can cause some real damage in that slightly wider position. He can survive in the traffic. God knows. He can survive perfectly well in a heavy traffic, but he doesn't have to do some damage when that traffic's a bit lighter out there.
And the combination is brilliant. I mean, they're two very good players in the centre, but they are together even greater than the sum of their parts.
And they give the 10 a chance to play.
Yeah,
just as Giopolotto gives Finn Russell permission almost to do the things, to try the things he wants to try, knowing that there's a bloke with a dustpan and brush behind him who's going to make him look pretty good when things are going slightly wrong. That's fantastic. And I thought Garbisi played very well on the weekend,
except for that strange crossfield kick.
Well, that was an interesting one.
But no, you're right. He's a terrific ball in hand player, Garbisi.
Yeah.
They talk about his goal kicking, which is a little bit flaky but can be good. But as a general all-round 10. Ball handling 10, he's much underrated.
Yeah, and two wings who can play.
Yeah.
I mean, Monty I think, had a very, very good tournament again, actually.
Yeah.
But far from being the only bloke who's going to pose some kind of threat, he's now in a threatening backline.
Yeah, 100%.
Good for them.
It's a shame that Brex is 31 is the only thing. I looked up his age after Saturday because I was thinking they've got a midfield now, which could see them through to the next World Cup.
Well, Frank Bunce didn't even play first-class rugby until he's 30.
No.
I think he's a sort of Frank Bunce type figure, actually. I think he will go on for...
Was he any good, Frank Bunce? Remind me.
I don't know.
Guys, we've barely even mentioned England, and as an England-based podcast, I think we should probably talk about them a little bit. I think France-England, we're in agreement, was the game of the weekend.
Absolutely.
It was an absolutely stunning. First of all, Lyon was absolutely raucous, so they did a fantastic job hosting. But anyway, we'll jump to the last important thing that happened. Is I said straight away to the people I was watching with before Thomas Ramos lined up that kick, this is Pollard's Rugby World Cup 2023, in that you've got one of the best kickers in the world with a not odds on kick, but it still just felt inevitable. I mean, I'm guessing that's exactly how it felt for you guys as well.
Yeah.
I think that we should give some plaudits to the much maligned Ramos as well. You know, I mean, he's an optional tackler at 10, which makes me wonder how he hasn't been exposed more at fullback.
Yeah.
Look,
he makes George Ford look like Henry Honeyball, doesn't he?
But his performance was just, I think, in terms of, ability to keep that focus, to deliver when he had to, was testament to why he's in the team, why they've backed him so much. And I thought, some of his defensive stuff is just, is so subpar at test level that it's not true. But some of what the rest of what he does is not. And for him to step in at the juncture that he did, I mean, you keep on seeing Hastoy, pictures of Hastoy in the stands as the bloke that Galtier won't pick, even though he's done the job for La Rochelle, in the European Cup final and so on and so forth. But Ramos is it's just typical of the French, really, in a way. Oh. And he was the match winner.
I mean, I join you totally in your loving with him. I think he's a lovely player to watch. I would just point out that I think he was a bit lucky to be on the pitch, because when that Freeman break down the right and he threw the pass into Mitchell, there's no doubt about it, he got a deliberate hand in on it, and it should have been dealt with, and it's inexplicable why it wasn't looked at. And that was about the 72nd minute, was it? England did score a few minutes later, but right. Ramos, there is an argument that he shouldn't have been on the pitch in the 77th minute.
Yeah.
That's the sort of player he is.
They're just fascinating to watch, aren't they? The French. In fact, I mean, I thought England played particularly well on Saturday. Really very good in almost all respects, actually.
Second.
But I mean, I watched the under-20s game the night before.
Oh yes.
And England, I mean, they deserved their victory. Their scramble defence was off the scale. Their application and commitment and just staying in the fight when everything was going wrong, very, very admirable. But some of the French rugby was bewilderingly brilliant. They just still have that habit of trying one extra thing. Just the one extra pass, the one extra offload, when they're going to score anyway. They're almost going to score anyway. But they try and do this one, and they must be the nightmare team to coach for a coach who's just looking to deliver results with the least pain possible. They must be the worst to coach, because some of the rugby they play is phenomenal. I mean,
and a double nightmare for England. They line up, and what's happened? Tulangi has dropped down from the senior squad and playing. He drops down last minute, gets dropped into the team to play,
and Gazzotti as well.
Two of the best young forwards in France suddenly lining up against you.
Oh, it was great stuff. I thought the game on Saturday in Lyon was brilliant and fair play. I mean, Ben Earl, crikey, whatever he's got at the moment, just bottle it. Because he is in a remarkable streak of form. Yeah, remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not as though people don't know he's coming now, because
France actually bottled him up for the first half, and I was thinking, well, what's happened here? I think it was Barnsley did a piece about his carrying was about 4 meters in the first half. I still can't keep a good man down for 80 minutes.
I still think he's a better 7 than 8, though, Brett.
He just let rip, didn't he, after the break?
I think he's a better 7 than 8.
He could be.
I mean, for me, the fascinating thing about England is obviously the transformation from the Scotland game. And George Ford has, you hinted, I think, last time round, Chris, that, he'd been, seminal to what has happened. And he basically, as I read it, has held up his hand and said that a significant element in England's problems was that he heaped it on himself in terms of saying that he'd gone into his shell, really, and that he'd started to play very much a percentage game of rugby with a very much narrower outlook than it is his natural bent, if you like. And looking at him in both the Ireland game and the France game, he typified the sea change that we saw in England. All of a sudden, you saw somebody who was playing flat to the line. I mean, that flick pass that he gave on before the Freeman try, it was exceptional. But they're right. He's right to hold his hand up in many ways and to say, because that's given them a direction. I mean, the transformation in England has been extraordinary, because in the first 3 games of the tournament, they were ordinary in every. I mean, even allowing for the fact that they're bringing in a new defensive system, they were ordinary in so many aspects of it. Whereas the 2 last performances they produced were an extraordinary transformation.
Yeah. I think Ford. I agree with it, absolutely everything you've said about Ford. As you know, I'm a George Ford man, really, at heart, and I have seen him go through his what he would call with a small c conservative spells. And there was one time I remember talking to Brian Ashton about this, and Brian was absolutely on the floor with grief that George Ford had been quoted as saying, "Well, there's sometimes in this game now where you don't want the ball." And Brian saying, "That is not George Ford. That is not George Ford. The negativity of that says everything about him that he isn't." I can understand other fly halves, sort of saying that and being all very territorially driven and all that kind of thing. And I only want the ball in this area of the pitch, etc., etc., etc. There's more to George Ford than that. There always has been. He is the nearest thing stylistically that I can remember to Stuart Barnes.
Well, look,
and he has developed slowly. He may not be quite as bloody minded as Barnsley was about things, because he really was a tough nut in a tough side. But he's stylistically, he reminds me of Barnes, and he is capable of doing the same kinds of things with the same kind of combination of imagination and application, and that's why I admire him.
I'm no more of a George Ford man than I am a Marcus Smith man, or a Finn Smith man for that matter. Because they're going to be players who may or may not be pushing him all the way over the next few years. But he's risen to the challenge.
Yes,
that's and you have to say very, very well done.
Yeah.
What is it with Northampton and Scrum Halves, by the way? I mean, Alex Mitchell, is pretty damn good at the moment. The kid, McParland, Archie McParland, is it? The under-20s?
Yeah.
Oh, talk about playing the house down. In Poe against the French on Friday night. I mean, there is a really good, quite a tradition of Northampton scrum halves, as we know. But crikey, this bloke could well be the next one off the block.
Mitchell's return certainly was another component in England, picking their game up. And the fact that he wasn't spending his whole time, and I have to say, apparently under orders, box kicking from the end of a caterpillar. He was moving the ball, which is his game, his speed of game, but he mixed his game up well.
Which goes back to Nigel Owens, dissatisfaction or disappointment with the way Wales played at the weekend. But that was almost, that was, we're going to box kick from, from the back of caterpillars until Italy get bored with it. Basically.
Yeah, which is very not Thomas Williams as well.
Which is not Thomas Williams. And it's probably not Costello, actually, in fact, and it certainly wouldn't have been Johan Lloyd. So
no, I think we've obviously spoken about England's trajectory, and I'd throw back to the Jerry Guscott episode right at the start of the championship, and he was asked what represented a successful Six Nations for England, and he said 3 was the magic number. Well, we got 3, but I think we also got a lot more than that, in that the total antithesis, particularly, I kind of see the Scotland game as a bridge. Obviously, in that first
First 15 minutes was
first
what we
15
saw the next two matches. Yeah,
exactly. There were signs, and obviously we didn't see it in the first two matches, but we very much saw it in the last two matches. And I think on top of that, we also said at the start with Ireland, you could predict 12, 13, maybe even 14 of their starting lineup pretty damn easily. I think now with England, you're probably verging on double figures, which is not something we thought we'd be able to say towards the end of the championship, certainly after two matches.
Well, without trying to be inappropriate, if Scotland game was the bridge, Murrayfield is the River Kwai.
7 out of 10, Chris. 7 out of 10. The sign made it better. Guys, let's do we want to know about the predictions league, or should we do our player of the championship?
Well, we know Chris has won, and we bow down in front of him.
Well,
we will celebrate heartily.
Unfortunately, I guess we've kind of opened the door just there and then. So given that Chris and yourself, Brendan, predicted draws this weekend, that has been sort of
brave
draws. But it has been something of a downfall. So Chris, who was top spot for the entire championship, you've finished in third.
Oh!
So a slight fall from grace. Well, Brendan, congratulations. You are the wooden spooner for 2024, which feels harsh.
Well done, Brendan.
This weekend undid all your good work with the Italy-Scotland prediction. Nick's between the two of you. So the Rugby Paper columnists, you've ended third, fourth, and fifth, which is fantastic.
This poor is the technical term.
I've defended. I haven't defended my crown. I came second, and the winner is Nigel Owens. So well done, Nigel. He did absolutely nothing for it, knows absolutely nothing about it, and he's already gone. So he can't accept the accolade. But the special guests have won, which I guess is about time, given that they do their predictions the week off. So that's the results of our predictions league.
So these are the winners are the people who make their predictions on an entirely different basis to the rest of us.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations to them.
This is rugby. You can't have consistency.
Hey,
this is rugby union. You have to have complications.
Sadly, there's no other way to do it. Well, next year, the only other option for parity is we all make our predictions the week of if we want. But we've won. Who won first year? I think Nick won year one and I won year two, and that was all submitting right at the start. So it is possible.
I think it's more fun because it just makes you look an idiot a bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And we've looked idiots several times this tournament.
We all did a Devon law at the first hurdle with picking France for
our Grand Slammers, yeah. And was it that? I think it was that first weekend. Well, we barely got a single result.
Well, 3 away wins, wasn't it? 3 away wins. It never happens, you know.
Well, I'm glad I haven't won because victory does not sit easily with me. You can't be a man of the people and a rebel without a cause, or a rebel without a suit, as I was always known.
Thank you, Scargill.
Yeah, there is a bit of Scargillism about. I've just found very late in life that I come from a family of coal miners.
Yeah.
So if you never understood me before, Nick, you understand me now.
I did understand you.
I see. Right, my mistake.
Background too. So there you go.
No, Chris, you can rest easy for another year. So anyway, those are the results that really matter, of course. Now let's everyone do player of the championship first, then moment of the championship, then surprise of the championship. Let's start with the wooden spooner. Brendan, player of the championship.
It's hard to look beyond Bundyaki. He has been immense. His resurgence in the last 18 months has been extraordinary. As previously mentioned, he used to be a bit of an issue with his tackling. He's improved that immensely. Go-to man. And to be the first choice in that Ireland midfield is some accolade. And that's not to say that there weren't other absolutely outstanding candidates. We've mentioned Brex, Menoncello, Lagarak, but Bundyaki for me, you try to imagine an Ireland team without him at the moment, and it's difficult.
Yeah. Chewy?
I agree with everything that Bren said about Aki. It sort of comes as no surprise, does it? After the stuff he was playing last year, his great triumph is actually to consolidate, if not kick on, from a pretty stellar 2023. I mean, he is in a fantastic vein of form. I think I would go Ben Earl, but only just. Those are the two obvious ones. A guy I was going to try and mention, if Wales had shown at all on the scoreboard, in terms of wins, I think Aaron Wainwright was absolutely outstanding for them throughout the tournament in difficult circumstances. I mean, he was completely a go-to bloke in all the ugly bits of the game. He does have the world's most stupid moustache as well.
He did against Italy.
And that should put him at the top of anyone's list. But no, you can't go for anyone Welsh. I'm happy with Ben Earl because I just think he's been transformative for the England attacking game.
Ben Earl won player of the match in the Ireland game, the Wales game, and I'm pretty sure I don't know who won player of the match on Saturday in the France game, to be fair, but I think had England
probably Ramos, but
yeah, maybe it was Ramos. Had England won it, I'm sure Ben Earl would have won his third one. So Ben Earl's absolutely my choice as well. Kano, round us off.
It'll be a prop you can't catch, won't it?
Dan Cole.
Yeah, Dan Cole's it. Look, I think that one of the standout areas, positional wise, in the Six Nations has been scrum half, and I think that Jamison Gibson Park is absolutely pivotal to what Ireland have done, and I think he was again this time round, even moving out to the wing where he made a brilliant scoring pass to Lowe against England to almost put them back in. I think Bundy Aki, I don't think that there's very much to choose between them. Gibson Park will certainly be a very strong candidate for the Lions as well. So I think that I'm going to go with an Irishman because they won the championship. I think Ben Earl is a very good call. I think Brex is a very good call, but I'd go with Gibson Park. I'd go with Gibson Park.
So our three: Gibson Park, Aki, or Ben Earl. I think that's a very, very good three. It gets announced later this week, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
we'll find out. Nick, we'll go moment of the championship.
Hugh, I thought that somebody we haven't mentioned, he only stayed on the field for 7 minutes against the French, but I just love the way that Furbank injects a completely different dimension into the England backline. I think he talk about players who've made a hell of an impact. I think that second England try against Ireland, where he came outside Itoje, and the acceleration that he put on it, I think that I'd like to mention him, but the bloke whose audacity sort of changed things in many ways was Le Garec and his pass, and also the quality of what he did for France in the final two games, because he was, again, sticking on that scrum half theme, he was somebody who absolutely lit the fire for them.
That pass was going to be mine. The most I've ever I've shouted at the television throughout that championship was the pass. So I think that's mine. Brendan,
what are we doing? Moment or
moment of the championship?
Okay. Slightly offbeat one. I mean, I've covered Italian rugby since the late 80s. Italy and Ireland was my beat in the 90s and the noughties. I've covered every single Italy win, but I've also agonised at their ineptness on occasions, their lack of progress, the way they also got shafted, I felt, with decisions over decades, never quite got their due. And anyway, the moment that did it for me was on Saturday, which wasn't a particularly memorable game, but Italy were just so proficient They were so going to win that match from almost the first minute. And then in the second half, they're 11-0 up, I think it was, and they scored this utter peach of a try by Pani. They are such a good set-piece attacking team, Italy. So way back in their half, brilliant hands. Ione burst through, onto Pani, gas, step, under the post. Utter silence, really. Wales crowd. I thought, this is Italy teaching Wales how to play rugby. I thought that was an amazing moment, and it sort of summed up how far they've come this season. Definitely, it started. We have to give credit to Kieran Crowley. He got them moving, he got them attacking, but he didn't get the balance of the game right. This was the full development of it, and I thought that was almost a historic moment. It was, could have hung that one in the Sistine Chapel. It was a gorgeous try at almost what some people call the home of rugby, and it was school in Wales.
No, great call. Chewy?
Well, he's just pinched it. I would narrow it down further. I would say the moment was the celebration of Pani's try. Because that, to me, encapsulated the whole joy of the game. And, the game can be, and has been, not in this tournament, it should be said, but can be a joyless thing. There were bits of the World Cup where I was really struggling to engage. There were wonderful bits of the World Cup, but there were bits where I as a rugby, consider myself to be a rugby bloke, although no one else does probably. I struggled to engage the joyousness of the celebration of that, and it was a hell of a try. And if anything underlined Italy's progress, it's the fact that Capuozzo's try hit the same end in the same fixture, which came completely out of the blue. And while we revelled in that Capuozzo try, a lot of us
actually, it was Padovani, wasn't it?
We were thinking,
we
won't be seeing that again. We won't be seeing that again. That's just a one-off. And for them to score that kind of try with a bloke in the same position, in very much the same kind of style, I thought was really, really more than reassuring. It just raised your levels of belief in what Italy might be able to do if they get this right from here. Because they're not a claustrophobic side now. They are, all those games against England where England scored 15 points in the first quarter of an hour, and then you have an hour of Italy with the ball doing absolutely nothing at all, and then England scoring 2 late tries, and it's, hey presto, is 27-6 it full time. Those days, we hope and pray, are gone. And, Italy like the open spaces now. Not only do they like them, they understand how to capitalize on them. That was a great moment for me.
Talking about open spaces, eat your heart out, Duhan van der Merwe. He's missed out on the great moments. Well, listen, I mean, it's the way it goes sometimes, but a fantastic hat-trick. A man absolutely, just on fire. And, I suppose, as an individual feat, a hat-trick against, the old enemy has to get some mention somewhere.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I'll tell you what, beware Australia, because that we're going to bring quite a formidable British and Irish Lions side to them in 2025. So,
well, there is that. But actually, talking of encouragements in rugby, and this has nothing to do with Six Nations, but the Australian Super Rugby teams, or the better of them, are putting together a couple of results.
Yeah.
And funnily enough, the Crusaders can't win a game.
Yeah, Fraser McWright is playing unbelievably well, isn't he?
It's a good back row, that.
Yeah. Surprise of the championship, and by this one, well, I'll do mine first to sort of outline what I mean by it, but you can also say find of the championship in terms of like a particular player. But my surprise of the championship is partly England, obviously from the 2-game in point, the transformance and the resurgence, but also the fact that Freddie Stewart, who was probably one of England's best players against Wales, now all of a sudden, and having been such a shoo-in in the 15 show, we can't fathom a way in which he gets back into this side, which is just a really, really bizarre juxtaposition to the way we've spoken about him in this England side and what he brings, and the assurance and stuff. And now, yeah, it just doesn't seem like he's going anywhere near this.
Although we have always said the key to unlocking England was possibly to move him and to get somebody else at fullback. So I think we've got to row back a little bit there. We have always suggested that was absolutely crux for England to produce a different sort of game.
Completely agree, but we'd never suggested that England for a second would do it.
That's right.
Chris, I don't think you've gone first yet with one, so go kick us off with this one.
My greatest surprise was opening night. Look, everyone can have an off night, but the French in Marseille, where they're notoriously difficult to beat, it was given a big build up. Yes, the World Cup had been a crushing disappointment, and yes, they'd lost Dupont. But you thought that if there's anything in this side at all, they will react in an incredibly positive way. And they reacted in a fantastically negative way. I was astonished by the poverty of their performance that night. Much as I admired the way Ireland played, I thought that is a precipitous fall from where they were. Not just in terms of rugby technicalities, they had a rough night. A lot of things went wrong for them. But just the poverty of their reaction when things were going wrong. They looked a confused and broken team in their first game since an epic classic World Cup quarterfinal. It was extraordinary, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So that was a surprise.
Brendan?
I'm going to class a player as a surprise, and we've already mentioned him in Nolan Lagarak. Now, I'd seen him a bit at club level and liked the look of what I saw, but I didn't realise the depths of his talent. I didn't have any idea, to be honest, he was that good. And the bizarre thing is, I'd written a column a few weeks ago about Dupont was irreplaceable. And actually, I'd probably still stand by that. But he's not really that irreplaceable, because as long as you've got a player who can produce moments like that, a Dupont moment, and he unveiled that pass in Cardiff, which I wrote another column about, but it instantly transformed France. That moment in itself, a brilliant, virtuoso piece of rugby, but also suddenly sparking the team up. And as we've all said, he was very, very good again on Saturday night, and they really have got a good in there. And if I was a French fan supporter, I'd be quite happy with that, because possibly too much emphasis on Dupont in recent years, and it will do them no harm at all to have possibly the world's second, third, or fourth best scrum half as a backup. So that's an interesting prospect going forward, but some player.
Yeah, and I think France, in terms of France's stock, obviously it sunk deeply after that game against Ireland.
Absolutely.
They brought a decent chunk of it back in those two final weekends. So I think there's definitely some hope there. Nick, round us off, and then we'll wrap up for today's mammoth episode.
Look, I mean, I guess in terms of if we say that Italy have been and they're coming of age as a competitive force in the Six Nations is one of the brightest moments about a Six Nations which has had a lot of feel good in it. I would say that one of the players that typifies it, and he plies his trade down in Exeter with the Chiefs. Ross Vincent looks to me like a player who could make a really significant impact for them going forward. He's got to be one of the quickest back row forwards that I've seen in a long time. I mean, he is really rapid. The recovery tackle that he made, I think, in the previous round against the Scots, and what he brings, what he's brought for them off the bench. He's not starting all the time for them, but the impact that he's brought indicates that they've got a rare find there. And
there aren't many as quick as that. I mean, I remember all the publicity traffic around Pierre Spies.
Yeah,
when he came in the Springbok side. Now he was certainly a different shape. He was a different size to Ross Vincent, but he was one of those players, one of those few number 8s you've seen where their straight line speed takes your breath away. You're really startled by it. I mean, Earl's quick, playing from 8, but this bloke Vincent, I mean, the gas is startling.
When he ran down Thomas Williams in about 10 yards.
Yeah.
At scrum half. When Wales had that break. I mean, he just ate into that ground. Ate into it. It was just a no contest, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But there are, there were so many, there's so many good, good points there. As you said, as Brent said, Panny's try for a guy to come off the bench and score a try like that with the flair that he scored it is fantastic for them too. But flair all the way, all the way through it. The guy Leo Barret that the French bought in at fullback, Deporter that they bought in. I mean, it was very interesting listening to the tone of some of the pre-match stuff regarding the French, certainly in our media, and being really quite dismissive of them in a way that I thought was unwise and proved to be unwise.
I mean, France don't come out of it too. I mean, God knows what's going on behind the scenes, as our episode with Maxime Mermoz sort of suggested. It's not. It's a lively old place to be, I would think, on the inside of that French squad. But when you think that they've gone in with no Dupont, with no Ntamak, they lose Jalabert pretty early. There was no Geelong. Dante's managed to tackle his way out of contention. I mean, and Woki's gone sort of AWOL. Crikey, that's a chunk of talent to lose, and to come out second in the Six Nations under those circumstances. I don't think they'll be chucking themselves off the cliff because
I mean, some of the stuff written about Galtier has been. Listen, I mean, he may not be everybody's cup of tea. But it's interesting, Sean Edwards reference that in Galtier's tenure, they have not finished below second in the Six Nations once, and that remains the case.
Would it be too harsh to say about Sean that, I mean, if England have changed their defensive system, so have the French, so they've gone for the basically non-tackling approach to defence, which is unusual for Sean.
Well, I think that applies in one position probably.
Yeah, that starts.
So you can just do the sort of blanket stroke across the whole team.
Fly halves marshalling the troops.
Yeah, yeah. The drift defense doesn't quite work when someone drifts completely, does it?
The picture, no,
drifts off the sleeve.
Just a quick word for Emmanuel Meafu as well, because he swatted aside Ben Earl and Maro Itoje, so in the sequence of about 5 minutes as well, like they were pieces of paper, which was quite scary to see, which I just thought was worth a mention. Guys, we've been recording for well over 2 hours now, so if you're listening and you've made it this far, then, well, 1, we apologise, and 2, fair play to you.
We've sent the hungover Irish back to sleep.
Yeah, we have. It wouldn't take much, to be fair. But no, I think we've obviously covered 3 Six Nations on the Rugby Paper podcast now. I think this has been the best one in terms of quality, in terms of competitiveness, and in terms of talking points. And I'm sure next year, France will be more formidable. England will hopefully be more formidable, and hopefully Scotland will be just as formidable and a bit more consistent. So I'm already looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to doing our British and Irish Lions 15. So for the next one, come prepped with that, guys. I think it will just be us for that, no special guest. And yeah, that should be a cracker. So thanks so much for sticking with me.
Get Andy Farrell on.
He might still be hungover in 2 weeks.
I don't think Andy, having been in the odd social occasion with Andy Farrell, I don't think on the list of people at risk of big hangovers, I think Andy Farrell is quite low.
Not him. Well, yeah. As Ireland avoided a World Cup hangover, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, indeed. Oh, very clever. Yeah. Yeah. Great wordsmithery, Ollie. Well done.
Thank you. The degree's got to go towards something. But no, we'll wrap up. Yeah. Thank you for sticking with me throughout the tournament, guys, and thank you to you at home as well. And we will see you soon.
Good stuff, Ollie.
Well done.
Thanks for listening to this week's edition of the Rugby Paper podcast. And don't forget to subscribe on whichever podcast platform you use and recommend the show to your friends. The Rugby Paper is available to buy every Sunday, and to make sure you don't miss it, subscribe through our print, digital and online options at therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions. That's therugbypaper.co.uk/subscriptions to get all our content for as little as 14p per day.